Thank you for joining us for a special presentation of Renee Reports. Tonight we have Omari Salisbury of Converge Media, and we will talk about the topic of gun violence, something that's been affecting all of our communities here in the Seattle and in the Pacific Northwest. We're discussing how this is impacting folks on the streets. Later in the show, we will have Selina Taylor, who is the mother of Ezra Taylor, who was a victim of gun violence. He passed away in September. But first, let me introduce our special guest, Omari Salisbury of Converge Media. Thank you for joining me, Omari.
Hey, Renee. Thanks for having me. Appreciate you.
So I want to start by just introducing you to those who may not know. I don't know who that would be, but Omari Salisbury is a multi-talented media professional and the driving force behind Converge Media. The global citizen, as he is known, Salisbury has traveled to 60 countries and brings a broad perspective, an unrivaled dedication to his team. In addition to founding Converge Media, he is also the CEO. Welcome.
Man, thanks for having me, Renee. And especially thank you for extending this invitation around a very important subject and something that we've actually been covering here on Converge for a very long time.
Absolutely. I don't think anyone's had better coverage than Converge. I want to start by sort of introducing you and talking about how we know each other. But first, I also want to thank you for your friendship and for your support, because honestly, I don't think people would take my work as seriously as they do if you hadn't put me on your show or had me on your live stream. So again, thank you very much.
No, I mean, well, you're welcome. And the thing is that we are friends, but two, it's like, man, we was right next to each other out there in probably one of the biggest stories that our city has seen in a very long time. We were side by side out there. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I have enormous respect for you and what you do, and your journalistic abilities, and man, your show up, and that's a big thing. You're consistent, and that's important.
Yeah, it was crazy out there, wasn't it?
Yeah. Something I'd never seen before.
Yeah, I think all of our audiences, both yours and mine, both know just sort of the sort of chaos that was brought upon the community of Capitol Hill, and obviously, but the important message that was being conveyed through the protests for Black liberation, and then of course the impacts that's had on the city, both through the riots and through staffing and through the Seattle Police Department. So let's talk first about the protest for racial justice, which obviously started as a reaction to the death of George Floyd, who was murdered in Minneapolis, Minnesota, by a police officer. And now, as a result of that came the CHOP, the Capitol Organized Protest. And I was hoping that you might share a little bit about your experience, especially as it relates to Lorenzo Anderson. I remember seeing you comforting the mother of Lorenzo Anderson right there in the CHOP, and just in general being a comfort to the community, knowing that someone who understands these issues is there and reporting on it. And I don't think you can get anything better as a viewer than having a journalist who understands the background of the issues and the people involved. Of course, what happened was a tragedy. Lorenzo Anderson was 19. He was shot and fatally wounded right there in the CHOP on June 20th of 2020. I was at the scene just a few hours after the shooting. I'm afraid to share this, but I did make some cringe content for Facebook. So I'll go ahead and show that to folks. And don't laugh. I'm coming to you from 10th Avenue and East Pine Street, the scene of a brutal shooting this morning, costing one Black Lives Matter protester his life. About 2:30 a.m., a man or unknown men approached this intersection and shot this man and injured another. They were transported to Harborview Medical Center for treatment. One of them, unfortunately, a 19-year-old, going by the name of Lorenzo or Little Raz, appears to have passed away as a result of those injuries. This morning there was a great deal of meetings and discussion about what to do and what this means for the Capitol organized protest. There's a lot of alarm that perhaps authorities may come in and end or bring an end to the protesters here who so far been peaceful and getting the message that Black Lives Matter out there and of spreading the message about police brutality and police shootings. Obviously, my broadcast skills have improved a great deal since then. I've had a great number of opportunities to appear both on TV and on radio, as well as on your show, obviously, the morning update. Now, you did know the family personally. Do you mind sharing a little bit about kind of what happened and then sort of what the ramifications of all of that have been for the city?
Well, yeah, well, I think even taking one step back is that the way that we're impacted over here at Converge is unfortunately the issue of gun violence in our city is generational. I remember being a student at Garfield High School and friends I was in school with murdered. And my son graduated a few years back from O'Day, and his friends murdered in the city. And so this is something that we, not only as a media company, but we as just people, we're constantly impacted by what's happening here, in the city. And Lorenzo Anderson Jr., say his name, his mom, Donita, like I've been knowing Donita a long time. And I didn't put the dots together that night. I didn't realize it. It wasn't until the next day that it really all hit me all again. I was like, man, that was Donita's son. And yeah, a member of the media and everything else, but man, human first. And
Mm-hmm.
One thing that we could do here at Converge that we try to do is a lot of times these victims, especially young Black kids, young Black men, there is no sense of dignity or humanity about how they lived or their story. And so with Converge, we want to always be able to bring that sense of humanity and dignity to these young people whose lives were cut short way too soon.
Now, obviously, the family did seek compensation from the city as a result of what their families lost. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, no, I mean, and there's a ton of lawsuits that are still out there. And be honest with you, it's like me personally and Converge, we're in so much litigation because so many people use our footage to go to court with. But that case, a judge said that the city could not be held liable. But I will say this, and I'm sure we're going to touch on it here a little bit later. In a conversation that I spoke with Mayor Durkin today, she was here in the studio specifically on this topic. That you know there's so many people who are impacted and are seeking. There's so many people, especially moms and family members who are just seeking a voice. And so even though that case was thrown out, like it's almost like doubled Donita's efforts in trying to be able to find resources for young people. She said that she wants to create a safe house for young people and for teens and for things like that. She's trying to start a media platform, a podcast, to be able to empower and embolden parents who've lost their children to gun violence. So although the courts throughout the case, that definitely hasn't stopped her or the family for what they're trying to do.
Now, 3 young men, all Black Indigenous people of color, lost their lives in an area that should have been, a healing um, and understanding place. What was your takeaway from what happened there?
Man, it's a lot, you know. Um, it's tragic, and unfortunately, the fact that was the protest zone is magnified it, and the tragic events that happened there. But you got to remember, just in the city of Seattle last year, it was 50 homicides, and across our city, and even more across the county. And those events there that happened there definitely, of course, changed the tone and the tenor of everything. There was, that the optimism, I think, that a lot of people had around that the protest zone. And it's also important too that we're not part of revisionist history. And even though these things are tough to talk about, it is important that when we do talk about the events of last summer, that we don't just forget about these victims who were there, because I mean, they were there, they lived, they breathed. Um, and I mean, what we witnessed there was it's no bigger word than to say than tragic. Um, we were impacted, but I always take a step back and say that, how we were impacted pales in comparison, of course, to the family members.
Now we've seen a dramatic increase in violence in the last, the first 3 quarters of this year alone. I think I have a graph to show folks. So what we're seeing here is that we've seen between January and September of 2020, for example, we had 59 firearm homicide victims. This year, from January to September, we've already exceeded that. We have 73 firearm homicide victims. Through January, September of 2020, we had 197 non-fatal shooting victims, but already we exceeded that this year, just in the first 3 quarters of the year, with 283 non-fatal shooting victims. And again, between January and September 2020 in King County, we had 767 total shots fired incidents, but we already exceeded that in the first 3 quarters of this year with 1,036 total shot fired incidents. Now, if you compare that to the total year of 2020, obviously the first 3 quarters of this year alone have far exceeded the totals for 2020.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, yeah, no, it's we're right here on First and Columbia, down right bordering the waterfront and Pioneer Square, and I mean the number of people that have been shot or shot and killed down here is crazy. Over in Occidental Park, right down the street at 7-Eleven, all over the place. And what we're seeing here in the city as well is that when you're talking about especially homicides and intentional people shooting someone, because there's a lot of people who have death by gun through suicide as well. So when you're talking about homicides or assaults with these guns, and we see that it's wide ranging across our city. And so in our community, we see things a lot of times are gang related or innocent bystanders and things like that. There's domestic violence, assaults now, with the guns that are on the rise, road rage. There's whatever's happening down here, downtown. And so it isn't just one segment of the population here that's impacted or that's actually creating gun crime in our city. There is a higher percentage, of course, like in our community when you look at the actual numbers, but gun violence is hitting all communities here in Seattle. And when you talk to people like Chief Diaz, it's like the accessibility of guns. There's so many guns that are here. In our city, and the accessibility for these young people, and these guys got heat. I mean, I bring it up often, but that shootout out there last year this time in the South End, Emerson Elementary, 70 gunshots fired. 70. I mean, and so when we think about the weapons that are out here and the accessibility to it, coupled with all these other things that are going on, I mean, it tends to, it's unfortunately a perfect storm in some cases around gun violence.
Yeah, we've definitely seen an increase in gun sales as a result of the pandemic, but a lot of those guns are ending up in the wrong hands. Now, of course, a lot of officials are describing this as a crisis. What are officials telling you?
Yeah, well, however people want to say it, they're all saying the same thing, So whether you want to talk to the police, to somebody like a Chief Diaz, he'll tell you that, like, yeah, this out of control. Whether you want to talk to somebody like King County Councilmember Gurmai Zahalai, who calls this a public health crisis, and they're really, and actually, Public Health Seattle King County, they're saying that gun violence is a public health crisis, and there's different approaches depending upon the different organization. SPD, the sheriff, they have their approach. Councilmember Zahalai is saying that we need to take the blueprint around COVID, when government and everybody buys in, saying, hey, we're going to counteract something, and we treat it like a public health crisis, like we have around COVID. We see, when we get everybody on the same page around a crisis here in our city or our region, we lead the nation. We're innovative in that way. But either way, if you look at it through the law enforcement lens, through the elected official lens, or community leaders, and of course the victims and victim families, I don't think that you're going to find anybody who's going to say that there isn't some level of crisis here around gun violence impacting our community.
Absolutely. I'll get into it in a minute how I've known gun victims and gun violence victims, both that survived and those that didn't, especially when we talked to Selina. But I do remember covering a lot of stories where I had to cover a shooting scene. And probably one that touched me the most was a 16-year-old Filipino boy in Rainier Beach, Earl Estrella. He literally just answered his door and he was gunned down in his doorway. The King County Medical Examiner said he died of a gunshot wound to the head. And I remember watching, his family and friends, come to the scene, hearing the news and just bursting into tears. It was a very painful thing to watch. I took both video and photos for Malcontent News. Now, I do have some B-roll I'll show really quick. I do apologize. I didn't have a great mic and you can hear me breathing, but just to give you an idea of what happened. Omari, is this where we're at? Is this where we're at in Seattle and in King County, where kids are literally just getting shot answering their own door? And kids are caught in gunfire, as we heard about at in the South End. What was that? The young kids football team.
Oh, yeah, you're talking about CD Panthers. You're talking about. So I would say this is that this is a good discussion for our city, right? And we're talking about, is this where we're at in our city? But like, unfortunately, I was said in the beginning here, is that this is this generational in some of our neighborhoods in our community. And so for some of us, unfortunately, it's not new. Unfortunately, my whole time there, I remember I was a kid on 24th Avenue. Somebody was stabbed to death in our front yard. You know what I'm saying? 7, 8 years old. And so for certain communities in Seattle, unfortunately, this has actually been going on for a long time. But what I was saying is that what's good about this conversation is that it really takes awareness across the city, like, oh man, this is what's happening. And there's one thing that we need to remember as well, is that what's happening, and this is one of the approaches that you got people like public health Seattle, King County, Zero Youth Detention, and other groups, because we're dealing with different variables right now. And some of these young people with these guns, man, are stone cold, and we're seeing that. And I would hope that that's not where we're at in the long term trend of our city. But my kids, they're away at college, um, but when my son is home and going home to the CD, it's times I'm like, nah. And he likes to walk. I'm like, nah, man. Let me get you an Uber or something. I mean, so we live it like every day. Nah, stay off the street. Or if you hear somebody is funky somewhere, somebody there's beef somewhere, man, stay away from this neighborhood, stay away from this block. And that's just something that, like, I'm unfortunately have to tell my kids when they're home and everything else. So there are people that have always kind of lived in this kind of situations. And I mean, we have to work desperately here to break this cycle of violence.
Now, I don't expect you have an answer to this, but I think we all know that when a Black Indigenous person of color is gunned down or dies in a community, we don't get the same coverage as if it was a white young child. And I wondered if is there a difference, between the way the media treats, these two stories?
100%. So let me tell you this is what's missing in the coverage of what happens here. And anybody who gets killed in our city, anybody, you know, anybody, they this level of dignity that is deserved. I mean, so let me tell you something here. When you just let's go back to February of last year, and let's talk about the murder of Anais Valencia up there at the Northwest African American Museum, right? And the SPD initially, they thought that Anais, those were the two girls that were shot up there, and one of them died up there in Nam, Jimi Hendrix Park. But initially, the reports were that the shooter and the victims knew each other. Now we went up there and actually Converge. It was we 100%. And I remember I said I called Chief Diaz, I called all the media out here in the city, and I was like, man, that's not the case. This was a random act of violence. But before that, no one cared. No one cared. No one cared about these victims there. It was like, man, there's just two other people dead. Maybe a drug deal gone bad. Maybe it was just no one cared. But as soon as we went on air, and the SPD, usually they don't go and update their whatever, you know what I'm saying? They don't update something across their blog or anything. We put a lot of pressure. And also Hannah Scott over at Cairo FM and Justin Carter, Capitol Hill, Seattle blog. Everybody was sitting there and putting pressure on the SPD. Like, hold on, man, these guys did not know each other. And as soon as that word changed and went like dominoes throughout the city, right? Because, all the news stations updated their reporting saying, oh, this was a random act of violence. Then Seattle's Humanity showed up. And I'm glad that it did. Because then all of a sudden it was like, man, is there a GoFundMe? How can we be of service to the family? How can we do a vigil? How can we do whatever? But that small thing right there, how it was reported, and it was reported that, oh, this might just been a drug deal gone bad. This might have been a gang beef or whatever. And no one cared. But as soon as it was a random act of violence, then Seattle, unfortunately, we turn our humanity on, we turn humanity off. And we saw that right there. And I'm glad when we talk about all the stuff that we cover over here, I'm glad that we were able to play a role in bringing some dignity and some humanity to Anais Valencia and her family and everything else. And this is what we see what's covered here a lot of times when we die in this city, when we're murdered in this city, man, there is very little effort to attach humanity to the victims. And the trauma, man, it just keeps reverberating in our neighborhood. And that's why somebody just put it up there. And that's why we say it's important that Black media matters. Because if ain't nobody else going to give our people no dignity, if ain't nobody else going to care about them, if ain't nobody going to acknowledge that they were here, they lived, they breathed, they walked, we will. And man, there's a big disproportionality in the way that things are reported here in this city, and especially when it's around Black people.
I remember that. Really appreciated your coverage of that situation. And you're right. Like after your coverage, I went out and reported about the officer involved aspect of this, the shooting that happened for Malcontent News. I later wrote about Aeneas Valencia for the Seattle Gay News and, the vigils, for the Capital Seattle blog. That was a terrible tragedy for our community, but you're right 100%. I wouldn't have gotten the coverage it did if it hadn't been for Converge Media. Um, I did talk to the family, her family. They were heartbroken, and there's a lot of families in Seattle that are heartbroken. And you asked that question of Mayor Jenny Durkin. What does she have to say to the families of this gun violence? Let's go ahead and roll that clip.
That I want to take a moment to uplift as well is a lot of these mamas that's out there, a lot of these families, a lot of these people that are impacted. Maybe we could start our conversation with you speaking to them.
Omari, I think that's, you're exactly right. And through this, that's the voice that gets lost often. And I think, this because of where you come from, but mothers in particular, they're the first violence interrupters from a time a kid is small. And we have created this bifurcated system, I think, in society, and even Seattle, when we addressed alternatives, we left the voices of the families and victims out. And I admit to being mayor, not doing enough soon enough, but we've really worked in the last month or two to make sure that we actually get that voice again in the system in a way that addresses it. So trying to help the parents of murdered children so that they can come together and address any range of challenges. When the worst thing in the world happens to your family, you can't be alone, and that's where many of these families are. And whether it's how the police respond or how the hospital responds or whether people even can see their child. And so we're really going to break down those silos and see if we can work city, county, hospitals, and listen to the impacted families to say, give us the guidebook and we'll give you the resources. And so I think that's one thing we have to do. But that's a program for when the violence has already happened. We got to get behind that and upstream to really be interrupting that violence in a meaningful way. And I've said it before, it sounds corny, but it starts with good prenatal birth care so the mothers are healthy and have access to opportunity, so the family's whole and has access. It's good schools, affordable housing, parks. It's what makes a city and a community safe. And it's what we haven't invested in, and we've got to be really honest about that. And if we're going to change that, we have to get at that root cause.
Right? Is this a holistic response that's required?
Yeah, well, I mean, and there's people have been saying this for a long time, and and the mayor in the full interview and even in that clip right there, kind of acknowledged the fact that one, in the here and now on the victim side, that there's a lot of voices that haven't been heard. It's a lot of voices that haven't been at the table, and a lot of stuff, and even policy and the way the city moves forward. There hasn't been a lot of intentionality about one, just acknowledging the trauma that people in our community are going through. And that's something we've been on over here for a long time, saying you don't need a media strategy to just show compassion or to show empathy or sympathy for a community. So I mean, it's good to actually hear the mayor say that this is something that they want to be intentional about, is bringing more voices of the victims to the table. And don't get it twisted. Activist voices are important, advocate voices are important, lobbyist voices are important, but we have to be able to make sure that those most impacted are also being heard. But what Mayor Durkin pointed to is this approach, and I keep going back to public health, Seattle, King County, ZYD. It's a lot of different organizations that are out there where it's like what Derek Wheeler Smith over at ZYD said, that violence interruption and everything else and stabilizing the streets, that's like 10%. The other 90% is like, man, jobs, is stable living situations, is access to education, is so many other things. And because if we don't look at it holistically, then what happens is the wholesale jailing, the wholesale lockup of a whole community, one way or another, right? And that's some of the talk that we heard coming out of South King County a few weeks ago. And so it's important, if we're talking about sustainable change here in our communities, that it isn't just the violent interrupters, and that's very key. We need to stop violence right now. But in order to build healthier and safer communities, we need to look at all these other aspects.
And where can people watch your interview with Mayor Jenny Durkin?
Well, I tell you what, Renee, we were actually going to air it today, but I held that clip there for you. And
Thank
so,
you.
so it first premiered here for you, because I know this is a special show that you'll put together. And so they'll be able to see the full interview tomorrow across all of our platforms, probably after 1 p.m.
Awesome. Now I want to talk a little bit about something that's personal to me. That is, there was a recent gun victim that I knew personally as a tween, Ezra Taylor. And I knew him because I knew his mom, Selina Taylor. And me and her worked together at a confidential youth shelter. And, together we knew many kids who were involved in gangs and gang violence, both there and at other organizations I worked at. I was introduced to kids that had been shot or, later were part of, a situation where they got shot. I really wanted to share a story with my audience and with your audience. So let me just bring her in really quick. Thank you so much for joining us, Selina.
Thank you for having me.
Sounds like we have a bad connection, but I do want to show you something I got for you, Omari. I dropped by, so we'll get to that in a minute, but her son had a clothing line, and I'll tell you all about it in a second. But basically, I dropped in at a pop-up that they had in Tukwila, and I don't know if you're going to be able to work this into your rotation, but I got you one of Ezra Taylor's hats. Keep it easy. He was the CEO. And a matching shirt. It says keep it easy. So I'll give that to you. Give that to you.
Yeah, more than happy to represent you. People are always talking, all I wear is Manor stuff. That's because I ain't got no other gear. So yeah, we'll have to hook up with that. More than happy to rock it over here on the set and uplift it.
Thank you so much for joining me, Omari. For those that don't know, they can obviously check you out at whereweconverge.org.
Whereweconverge.com.
Whereweconverge.com. Thank you. And obviously your social media, you're on, all the social medias.
Yep. You can catch me at Omari Sal or at OMARISAL. Easy to find. And then also, I do want to say this, and I'll let you get into to your interview here with Selina. Is I do want to say this is that, man, we're a platform for uplift in our community. We know that so many people in our community are traumatized, and we know that oftentimes when we lose young people in our community, like I said, there is no attachment to their humanity in telling their story. It's a very much an open door over here at Converge, and whatever we can do to be supportive of our community members in their time of need, man, we're here for you.
Thank you so much, Omari.
Thank you.
Selina, now, obviously we know each other from our work both at the Confidential Youth Shelter. You saw me at a different time where I was a lot more clumsy and corny for sure. And my jokes, they just were no fun. They were not funny. But you really related to the kids. I mean, so many times we had a kid who came from a difficult situation. They had a lot of trauma. Their families were broken up, or they were part of gangs. And time after time, I saw those kids gravitate towards you because you had like this mother persona. And not only did you have that persona, you honestly were the mother to many kids both while they were at the shelter before and after. You knew some of them from other agencies before that. Um, and, honestly, if I could give you an award, I would, because you just had such an impact on your community. I remember you had an organization, Taylor Made Outreach, and you were really educating these kids, giving them job skills, helping them to get interviews, apply for college and that kind of thing. It was very meaningful to me. So obviously, when I heard of Ezra's passing, it's very hard on, well, obviously on you, but hard to hear because I know what the pain that you're going through. If it's okay, I did want to share a little bit about what happened for those who may not know.
Okay.
So it might be painful to watch.
Okay.
For those that don't know, Ezra Taylor was shot and passed away in Des Moines outside of La Familia Sports Pub and Lounge on September 28th. 2 other people died that night, and 3 were hurt in the incident. Investigators said moments before bullets were flying, a large group of men and women were seen on surveillance video arguing in a parking lot. One of the men in the crowd was captured on camera, violently pushing several women to the ground as the fight got heated and more emotional. Police say that Ezra was just an innocent bystander in all this, and yet he lost his life. I do have a clip from Cairo just to give you a basic background about what happened.
But Des Moines police tell us they really didn't know what had happened themselves until they got a look at the surveillance video. And yes, it does show that that altercation started here in this parking lot, not in the nightclub itself as they first thought. But the owners say those initial reports have already hurt their fledgling business. The surveillance video clearly shows the altercation that turned deadly outside La Familia Sports Pub and Lounge. It was just before 2 Sunday morning. A gaggle of people talking loudly, then this.
We were actually closed 25 minutes before the violence started.
John Hart, who owns La Familia with Frank Gittins and 2 others, says they were inside cleaning as the fighting erupted.
We noticed there was some pushing and shoving out here in the parking lot. Came out here with security. The security stopped the fisticuff and started moving people off of our property and guiding everyone to go home.
Watching the video was a lot more revealing to me.
Des Moines Detective Sergeant Scott Oak says it was then that they realized the entire incident happened outside the bar. Once the fight was broken up, the crowd dispersed, some north to the Red Lion, others south to the Walgreens. That's when police believe at least 2 people opened fire on the crowd.
There was a lot of shots fired. It was a chaotic scene for sure.
Do you know how many shots were fired?
I don't have the exact amount. Some witnesses said 20 to 25.
He says 1 man died in the parking lot, a woman died on Pacific Highway, another man was scooped up by passersby who took him to a local hospital where he was pronounced dead. 2 other men and another woman were also shot. They have so far survived.
From La Familia, we want to put our heartfelt condolences to the families and the victims on that tragic night.
Gittins says neither he nor his partners condone the violence.
Now, both of us know Ezra as Easy. That's what his friends and family called him. I did attend a vigil that was held in his honor, as well as to remember Antoine Matthews Jr. and Angelia Hilton, who all died outside of La Familia on October 2nd. Do you mind if I share a clip of the vigil?
Go ahead. Mm-hmm.
For those that didn't know Easy as we did, can you share a little bit about his spirit and who he was?
Oh, well, my son was very, very humble. Um, so, I mean, in the beginning, um, when he was born, just a little bit about Ezra, um, the cord was wrapped around his head, and he lost oxygen for 10 minutes. The doctor said he would never walk and never talk. And to the, he is walking. He was talking. He graduated from high school. After that, he went on to be a part of the New York Film Academy, where he was enrolled in Los Angeles. He was an inspiring actor, and he was working with many, many different actors and actresses. But just overall, he was just a really, really wonderful, wonderful child. Very humble, never complained about anything. He would always be in the crowd and the community, loving and caring and sharing, and whatever they needed, he was there. Wherever they were, he was there. If somebody wanted help, he made sure that he helped them. Ezra Nehemiah, his name is Helper. He lived up to his name, and he's a very, very, and he still is actually, even though he's not here, his spirit is still here. But he is a very, very wonderful child. Never had any issues, concerns with him. As far as being in trouble, he would always help a lot of people. Sometimes I would get upset with him because he would say, "Mom, we need to go help somebody at 3 o'clock in the morning." But little did I know, I realized that he got it from his mom. So, but he was an amazing young man, and he actually, that's what made him start his clothing line. I don't know if you wanted me to talk about that too, but he actually started his clothing line, and it's Keep It Easy. And he would always want people to keep it easy. He would always want people not to fight, but keep it easy. He would always want people to just do things right and keep it easy. Don't do things so hard. A lot of people are out in the community. A lot of people are here to help, but keep it easy. And so he started his clothing line. Unfortunately, he was not here to launch his clothing line, but as a mother, I launched his clothing line, and we did his first pop-up. It was a huge success. A lot of people came out to support him and his line, and we actually have another event this Saturday coming up, which is really, really awesome, at the Columbia City Night Market. And he just had a lot of stuff that he was doing behind the scenes. He would always say, "Mom, don't say anything to nobody." But now I am saying a lot of things, what he did and what he has done. And we started an organization in his name, nonprofit organization. So I might be moving further, faster than you. Renee. But so I'm gonna stop there, and then yeah. But we are still making his name active and alive. Yes, it is hard for me as a mother to not have my child here. Um, but I know that his spirit is still here because his spirit was love and his spirit was excellence. And so with his spirit, I will continue to make sure that the community makes sure that Ezra Hands Outreach is a wonderful, wonderful, great outreach for families that receive love in any way possible, if we allow it. Yeah.
Yeah, I was really touched when you told me about Ezra's Hands Outreach. I remember sort of interviewing you briefly, and you said the nonprofit is to ensure that families are valued for who they are and to empower them to achieve their success through developing programs that will prepare them for the unknown or unexpected, and that would touch the lives of many through love and authenticity throughout the world. As you mentioned, as Easy like hated any kind of violence, any kind of fighting, and he always said, "Keep it easy." Thus, the clothing line that he started as the CEO. Can you tell us more about what you want to achieve with this nonprofit and the work that you plan to do?
With the Ezra Hands Outreach, we really want to make sure that we are really achieving the love atmosphere for the youth and families. And it's actually in our DNA to love each and every person that comes through the doors. And especially when it comes to gun violence, especially when it comes to um, having not having a love foundation in the home. And what Ezra Hands Outreach is one of the things that we are going to be doing as well is um, having programming, having workshops, and um, having youth and families coming in to making sure that we get to the root of why someone picks up a gun. A lot of times we just look at the person and say they're bad people or they're challenging people, but we don't take the time to say, well, why did they pick up the gun in the first place? And so Ezra's Hands Outreach is a program where it's life skills. We're going to get to the root and start at the root, not just the surface. But the thing is that we're going to love them where they are, because a lot of these youth, a lot of these people that are picking up guns or have guns in their possessions, sometimes they don't feel that people are loving them or another situation. But Ezra's Hands Outreach is going to do anything and everything that we possibly can to make sure that anyone that comes through the doors, making sure that they have the life skills, they have the tools, they have the guidance that they need to um, to feel the love and the God love that they need to feel when they come to Ezra's Hands Outreach, whether it be workshops, programming, street outreach, and many things that Ezra has done and did for the community. He was actually he's seen a lot of violence. He's seen a lot of funerals. He's gone to a lot of funerals. He's gone to families where they help with shelter. Ezra's Hands Outreach is providing food, providing shelter, providing a lot of different things that Ezra did, and incorporating that with Ezra's Hands outreach. And so a lot of Ezra's Hands that he's done, we're now going to do with the Ezra's Hands outreach. And I know a lot of people know Ezra, but a lot of people don't. But when you come through Ezra's Hands outreach, you will experience the love that Ezra gave everyone that touched him.
Absolutely, 100%. I remember even as a tween, he was a real leader, and the other kids followed him literally everywhere he went. And he was a real bright light at the event. He really had a lot of positive energy. He was very optimistic. And he was pretty much everywhere and into everything, but in the best possible way. The community groups at these fairs, community fairs that he was at, just loved him, adored him. And, they all spoke to you fondly of him and you were telling you about all the fun things that he was doing at these events. And so when I learned that, he had become a model, an aspiring actor, I wasn't surprised at all, because he had that very positive, just magnetic force, that really touched and moved a lot of people. Now, I know that he was in a movie, and there's a lot of great acting in this film, and it was called It Takes Talent. Do you want to introduce that movie before we show a trailer?
The movie It Takes Talent. It is he has played a role of a big brother, and he was inspiring to become an artist in this movie. And he had a lot of obstacles with his actor mom in the movie, where she was on drugs and he was kind of having a hard time with doing the artist piece, and then taking care of his sisters in the home, and then worrying about mom in the home. And so it's a really inspiring film that he finished his first film, where at the end he did what he said he was going to do, and then loving and continuing to love his mother through all of the turmoil, all of the issues that she had or whatnot, and she began to clean herself out, which is really exciting. So I love that movie, and I seen it the other day. It just really gives me great joy and great sadness at the same time. But yeah, that is the movie, and It Takes Talent.
Well, let's take a look and then we'll come back.
Okay.
So we doing this or what?
You'll finally be able to help your family.
This is foster home, man. I can't keep living like this.
Yeah, I feel you. Hey, but all that could change if you go to the party, right?
How about you two rap battle me there with a bigger crowd?
Get KJ off.
Man, what are you talking about? We both wrote this song.
And he's not your caliber. He's bringing the song down. Do you really want to win this contest?
Now grab your hat, your shit, and get it.
I just don't know. What about you? How far are you willing to go?
Whatever it takes.
That last line of Ezra, just really made me, hit me really hard, and really made me want to cry, because his acting is so good,
Yeah.
And a great light has been put out through no fault of his own. So move along before I cry. Now, I know that one of the suspects turned themselves in this case, um, and can you want to talk more about sort of that and what's happening with uh, the suspects in this case and the case as it's moving through the court system?
Yes, one of the uh, shooters has turned himself in, and we had gone through the process as far as the courts with the arraignment, and so now we are just awaiting the uh, pretrial or the trial coming up, and that would kind of take a while to happen. But as far as the one that's in, it is he's in until the we're praying that he's going to be in until the court is coming up for the trial. And it's been really hard though, because as a mother or as a person, you know, uh, dealing with going back and forth to the courts, and um, it's almost reliving it all over again from the beginning, and it's very painful for our family, and so we are just there for one another, um, and but with the courts and with all of this gun violence and all of this, um, kind of taking it a bit further for myself, because I'm an advocate of that's my DNA, and so kind of taking it up to the higher heights of different ones in the community and the city and the state. So we are actually working behind the scenes to do a lot of different work that pertains to gun violence, that pertains to the things that needs to happen in regards to sentencing, in regards to having these weapons on the street leniently. I'm really frustrated, and a lot of people are frustrated and bothered and about the leniency that ones have when they're carrying these weapons. And so behind the scenes, we are working to make changes for the better for the community, not just my family, not just for Ezra, but it's for everyone else that lost a life, everyone else that feels that change should happen. And because we do not want to continue to allow us to hear guns, violence on the streets, and so we're taking a different approach, and it's going to be something different that it has not happened before, which is really I don't want to say too much, but I want to make sure that I get this out, that I'm fighting for every family out there that lost a loved one, every family that is hurting, every family that is grieving, because it hurts when you lose someone, especially to gun violence, and especially if they're an innocent bystander, if they're just standing on the street and someone just takes their life, and it hurts a lot, and we have a lot of families that are hurting, and we are definitely doing that through Ezra's Hands Outreach and myself and my family.
Now, are police still looking for DeMarcus Simmons, a suspect in this case?
That's what the latest that I've heard that they are. Yes, correct.
I asked folks to take a look at their screen, and if you know this individual, please call the Des Moines Police Department or Crime Stoppers. You could be entitled to a reward up to $5,000, I believe. I want to thank you so much, Selina, for coming on the show. You've been a great friend, a great coworker, and obviously, again, I extend my sincerest sympathies to you for Ezra and the loss of such a wonderful person in our world.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Selina.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me.
I want to take a moment to also mention that one of my friends, Ken Campbell, passed away. I got a call last night about midnight to let me know that he had passed away after being unconscious at Harborview Medical Center. He was the editorial cartoonist for the Seattle Gay News and was insanely talented and a real bright light in the world. He is leaving behind his mother, his father, and his sister, as well as his beautiful feline companion, Cheeto. So I wanted to introduce you guys to Ken Campbell. And with that, I want to thank everyone for watching. I know it was a difficult topic, and I appreciate all of you who stayed through to watch all of it. We need to do something about gun violence. It's obviously impacting our community and costing us too many wonderful young lives. So again, thank you and have a good night.